It was 2:30 in the morning, Saturday, May 24th, 2003. I woke up with a start. It felt like I had sensed that there was a wild animal, a lion or a tiger, in my house. My bedclothes were wet. I was dripping sweat. There was anxiety and adrenaline all throughout my body, and my heart was pounding through my chest. I got up to try to see if there was something in the house, and it woke my wife up, Hope, and she came and she said, "Honey, what's going on?" And I said, I don't know. I've never had something like this. I am literally, honey, falling apart inside. And little did I realize that that event began a 7-month period that was the worst period of my life, including when my father died when I was a little boy. I had daily panic attacks. I was, for the first month, curled up in a fetal position on the couch. I was terrified if the phone rang. I could hardly drive a car because any stimulation just set my anxiety off the charts. And I got into therapy, got on medications, which I'm a strong believer of. There should be no shame if you're taking medications for anxiety or depression. I'm not ashamed of it, and you shouldn't be ashamed of it. It's just under a doctor's supervision. It's just food for your brain. It restores chemicals that you're not able to do yourself. So please. But I went on that, and I still am on a maintenance dosage. But let me give you a little background about myself at that moment. I was born with a genetic predisposition towards anxiety. I can trace it through 4 generations of terrible anxiety on my mom's side of the family. And I also was raised in a highly anxious home. My father almost died when I was 6 months old. My mother took him to Jefferson City, the capital of Missouri, and to undergo a radical surgery, which they did in those days. If a patient was desperate, they tried an experimental surgery. It could have killed him in the surgery. They got what they thought was the cancer. He lived until my 2nd grade year, but then he passed away of the cancer. But all during that time, the house was under the aura of death and of my dad knowing that he might not have long to live, and my mom just being extremely anxious. And so I watched all that. And I was a pretty observant little guy, and I think I internalized it. So throughout most of my life, I was kind of high energy. But I never was dysfunctional. I was always able to sort of live my life, and until May 24th, which was the day after school ended, and I had just finished the single most stressful year of my entire teaching career at that time. Well, I got into counseling and got on meds and began to kind of redouble my efforts to learn to worship and to pray through the Psalms. And the day after Christmas, it lifted. And I was okay for about 10 years. And then I had another school year that was the 2nd hardest school year I had ever had. And I'm having a tough one this year. Barry, if you could double my salary, it would just, let's talk, brother, after the, but I went through another school year, and you know what? The day school ended and graduation was over with, I was walking to my car in the parking lot to go home, and I got hit with a bolt of lightning. Not literally, but in my chest and my body. And I said, oh God, not again. And it happened again. 5 months of daily panic attacks. Wanting just for God to kill me. I couldn't kill myself, but an 18-wheeler through the front of my little car would have been just a gift. Life was so painful and so fearful to me. In the middle of that time, I believe the Lord spoke to me and said, I will guide you, but I want you to take the research skills I've given you. I want you to read everything that you can on anxiety and depression under my guidance. Write down what you learn and begin to practice the most important things that I lead you into. And then I want you to write it for my people after you've seen it work in your own life. And that's what the book Finding Quiet is the result of that. Well, it turned out that I began to explore what I could do in addition to counseling, which I actually didn't get then, but medication, to try to cooperate with the Spirit of God to get well. And I discovered an amazing truth about anxiety and depression that changed my whole perspective. And I'll tell you that truth and illustrate it in a bit. But as a result of that discovery, I began to engage in 4 specific practices every day. And after about 2.5 months, maybe 3 months, I began to feel my life change. How do I know that these practices changed my life? Well, in August of 2015, I began a 3-year period where I had 8 surgeries, 3 life-threatening cancers, a pacemaker put in, radiation, actually 2 rounds, a round of chemotherapy, and I have never been happier and more at peace and full of joy and just utterly unconcerned in my life. And my married daughters and my wife kept coming up to me and saying, what in the heck is wrong with you? I mean, you know, I'd come to class and I had a little chemo pump. I'd go in for my treatment, and this one chemical was so strong that you couldn't take it in a 5-hour period of time, so I'd have to wear this pump for 48 hours. And I'd set it on the table and lecture. One time I got up to the blackboard and forgot the darn thing was in, and it pulled, I started bleeding, you know, it was like a Saturday Night Live skit, you know, there was blood pouring out of my chemo port. It was really kind of funny. But I didn't get to finish the lecture, unfortunately. But I was okay. I mean, and it was because of the things that I'm going to share with you that really began making a difference in my life. Before I get into this specific details, just 2 more big points. Number 1, in the last 12 months, 40 million Americans, just under 20%, have had a major anxiety episode. Not just worry or concern, a major anxiety episode. And now anxiety is the number 1 mental health crisis over depression in the United States. So again, if you suffer from this, you are not alone. Never feel isolated or alone. You're in, I don't know what to call it, good company or lousy company, but one or the other, you got company. So the other thing is the most important thing I learned, and I'll tease this out, and you'll see the genius of the Bible, I think. The most important thing I learned was this, that anxiety is largely, not entirely, but largely a learned habit that can actually be unlearned by the right practices. Anxiety is largely a learned habit that can be unlearned by engaging in the right practices. Now, to illustrate this, I'm going to try to show how this idea is actually embedded in a very bizarre New Testament passage that I read for years and had no clue what it meant. It just seemed utterly irrelevant. But now I can see that it was, I was the idiot. It's really unbelievable. And it's actually confirmed today by neuroscience, and these two are coming together. So I want to read a text in Romans 6. I'm going to read 11 to 13, and then verse 19. I'll be reading from the New American Standard here. And you're just going to have to hold on, because this is going to be, Paul says in Romans 12, present your body as God, as a living sacrifice. What does that mean? I used to think, well, why not your mind or your emotions or your will? Why your stinking body? I mean, what's that about? And how do you do it? Do you just go, well, I thought what you did is you got on your knees and said, Lord Jesus, I surrender my body for you to walk around in it and to minister to others and to use it to speak your truth and so on. In your name I pray, amen. That ain't what it was, but that's what I thought it was. And the Romans 12 is clarified earlier in Romans 6. And so Romans 6 is the key here for me. It says, therefore, don't let sin reign in your mortal body. Now, let's just say sin is not just violating morally upright rules, but sin is more pregnant in this passage, and it includes engaging in practices that harm us from flourishing and having shalom in the kingdom, well-being in the kingdom. I'll show you in a minute why I believe this is a richer concept than simply moral rectitude. It has to do with getting rid of your fears and your depression and anxiety and learning to live in a way that you have a deep sense of well-being and flourishing. So where are the hindrances to living a life anxiety-free and depression-free and of shalom? They reside in your body. Not your soul, not your mind, your body. Okay, stay with me. Don't go on presenting, don't go on presenting the members of your body to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourself to God as those alive from the dead, and present your members as instruments of righteousness. I'm speaking in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you presented your members as slaves to impurity and lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness, resulting in sanctification. There's the tie. So that the concept is that if you want to mature and literally have love and joy and peace and patience growing into your character, you have to learn how to present your body parts and your regions of your body, like your facial regions, to God as instruments of unrighteousness. Now, how do you do that? Well, let me give you 4 concepts I want to define, and then I'll illustrate it and then apply it. First is the notion of a habit. A habit is a tendency to think, feel, or act a certain way without choosing to do so. A habit is a tendency to think or to feel or to behave in a certain way without choosing to do so. Some of you get up in the morning, or you are around people and you walk away saying to yourself, I am such a loser. Just made a fool of myself. People are talking about me. You don't choose to do that. That's a habit of the way you talk to yourself. Others of you get up in the morning and you go, ugh, it's going to be a bad day. And you feel terrible. And that is a habit that you're in. You can have habits of behavior. I have penmanship habits. I have lousy handwriting. My wife can never read a note that I leave for her on the phone. Yes, we still have a house phone. And so we have habits. Now, character is the second term. Character is the sum total of your habits. Character consists in your habits. Your habits constitute who you have become habitually. The next two concepts are body and flesh, soma and sarx. The body is an ensouled biological structure. You're looking at my body now. It has organs, it has systems like the circulation system, and it has regions like the forehead and the upper facial region. Now, what is flesh? Okay, here it is. Flesh are the habits contrary to flourishing in the kingdom that reside in specific body parts. Your flesh consists of your habits that are contrary to flourishing in life, getting good at life, living well in the kingdom, that reside in specific body parts. And I'll illustrate this in terms of golf. What I'm about to say to you, I mean to be literal. This is not a figure of speech. This is actually quite literal. Suppose that you played golf and you wanted to flourish as a golfer. You wanted to be good at golf. And the way that you positioned your legs and your waist and your feet were really good. But you had golf flesh in your shoulders and your wrists, which meant that in those members of your body, you had habits of swinging a golf club that were lousy and were counterproductive in terms of getting good at golf. Well, if I knew that, I might say to you, I want you to present your members of your body, namely your shoulders and your wrists, to a golf instructor as instruments of golf righteousness and to get rid of golf flesh. And I would mean this: I want you to replace the bad habits in that area with good habits. Well, how would you present yourself to a golf instructor? Would you walk up to him and say, Mr. Golf Instructor or Mrs. Golf Instructor, here are my wrists and shoulders. Use them, swing with them. They're yours. I wouldn't recommend that, honestly. And don't go home telling your parents this is what you're learning at Biola, okay? So, no. What you would do is the golf instructor would say to you, I want you to practice the following exercise 100 times a day for the next 3 months. And I want you to do it over and over and over and over again. Now, you would be lousy at first. In fact, if you did that, the swing would feel awkward, phony. I mean, that's the way I swing a golf club. You'd feel like a hypocrite. It wouldn't work. In fact, it would make your game worse. You wouldn't be very good at it. But if you stuck with it, do you know what would happen? You would cultivate golf righteousness. That just means habits in these members of the body conducive to being good at golf. That's all that means. And they would replace the habits that are fleshly, that are contrary to being good at golf in those body parts. Does that make sense, or does that make sense? Okay, I don't usually give my students any options either. All right, so now what Paul is saying is that if you want to get good at life, you have to discover which members of your body are triggering your counterproductive emotions and thoughts and behaviors. And you must present those to God by practicing things that will regroove those body parts into a shalom triggering a body that is not triggering anxiety and depression. And the two most important organs that you need to present to God are your brain and your heart muscle. Your heart muscle. I can't go into the heart muscle, but boy, believe me, what has been discovered by science is consistent with what Scripture says about your chest, what's going on right here. If you can control what's going on right here, you will learn how to not only be close to God, but you will learn to lay aside fear. And even if not entirely, you'll make progress. Okay. Now, what this has done, what this biblical teaching indicates, is consistent with something that we've discovered in neuroscience called neuroplasticity, which is the idea that your brain structure can literally be reshaped by thinking differently. So they took people with obsessive compulsive disorders, took a PET scan of their brains, had them just engage in a different way of thinking. If they had to wash their hands again, wait a minute, you're not going to die. Your neighbors don't wash their hands all the time, and they're still alive. It's not going to kill you. You're going to be okay. And if people spoke to themselves differently every time an urge to wash their hands took place, even if they didn't believe the thought, in 3 weeks, their brain scans were significantly healed of the obsessive compulsive disorder. And that is unbelievable. And that's what you need to do. And there are, in Finding Quiet, there are 4 habits that I found that are absolutely essential. I'm going to teach you one of them right now that you can start doing today. Now remember, if you do it, if you start, it's not going to do you a bit of good. And you're going to be mad at me because it's going to be counterproductive. But if you stick with it for 2.5 months, 3 months, and do it every day, you will get better. You will get better. And this is called the 4-step solution. The 4-step solution. It is deeply biblical, but it was discovered by a neuroscientist Christian who teaches at UCLA. And the purpose of this is to help you get rid of anxiety and depression producing self-talk. What we've learned is one of the main things that causes anxiety and depression are not fearful circumstances, but how you interpret and think about them. The real problem isn't anxiety, it's having anxiety about getting anxious. And then we ruminate, and then we go, I've been in that tunnel, and it's not pretty down there. So the first thing you want to learn to do is to stop talking to yourself that way. The problem is the self-talk is habituated. It's a habit. So we're not aware we're doing it. And then we end up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and we're scared to death and we don't know what happened. Well, we've been telling ourselves things that trigger our adrenaline and anxiety chemistry and because of the self-talk. So the first thing you want to do is to learn to spot and relabel the self-talk. You spot and relabel it. Let me explain. When I get up in the morning, I pray Psalm 139, 23 to 24, which says, "O Lord, search me," and that means my whole body, and I'll do a body scan. I want to know what feelings are in my body. Search me and know me. Examine me and know my heart. Try me and see if there's any way of pain, which I think means a way of fear or anxiety or depression or anger in me, and lead me to shalom. Lead me to shalom. So I invite the Lord to help me notice my self-talk. I want to be able to start noticing it, okay? And so what happens is you'll be doing something and something will trigger a negative way of talking to When you go to the meeting tomorrow to study, everybody's going to find out how stupid you are and that you don't know anything. That just gets triggered. You're not even aware of it. It just happens. But when you can become aware of it, you stop and you first of all relabel it. And you say this, wait a minute, you are nothing but a bad habit in my brain. You're nothing but a triggered brain message. Now the thought is in your soul, but the triggering of the thought are the neurons that have wired together to form a groove in your brain. Does that make sense? The thoughts in your soul. When you die, your thoughts go with you. They're not in your brain. But what is in your brain is like a CD, the grooves that trigger the music if you put it in the right retrieval system. So the problem is your brain. Your tendency to anxiety resides in your brain and heart muscle. Okay, so you say you're nothing, you got nothing to do with reality, you have nothing to do with that meeting, you're nothing but just a bad habit. You have no relationship to truth the way the world really is. That's step one. Step two is you reframe it. You reframe it. And there in the book, there are 10 thought distorters that I list, that we all do, that I have 2 that are my favorites. My favorite one is catastrophizing and what-ifing. So I what if, and then I go, oh gosh, if that happens, I'm dead. And so I spend all my time figuring out how I'm going to protect myself if that happens. Okay, I think I got that bolted down. And then there's another what if. I lived my whole life in the future, making sure I'd be okay. I never lived in the present. And I've been living in the present now for 4.5 years. And it's really different. My wife will say, when is your next trip? And I say, I don't have a clue. I didn't know when my surgeries were. I just had, I'd have to look it up. But it was crucial to me to get there because I was desperate. All right, now, they've learned in medicine that if a person has physical pain, if they can just tell the patient the name of what's ailing them, they can stand more pain and be okay with it. Isn't that amazing? Because dismissing it gives you a sense of power over it. And what steps 1 and 2 do, I will say, hey, you're just a brain message. That's all you are. And in fact, I can even label the type you are. You're catastrophizing and what-ifing again. Get out of town. And so that gives me power over it. Step 3 is crucial. You refocus your attention. You have to turn away from ruminating on the self-talk and the fear and get into what psychologists call flow. Flow, I have a whole book at home on flow. Psychologists, flow is when you get so caught up into something, you lose track of time. Like what you feel when you're reading one of my books. So you get into flow and you turn away from the self-talk, you've relabeled it, you've reframed it, and then you say, I'm going to get busy doing something. I can't just say stop thinking about it. So you get involved. Scott Ray saved my life because on my first breakdown, I'd never read a novel in my life. And he came over and he drove all the way to my house, brought me 5 or 6 novels that were espionage novels. And when I would be having an episode, I would go in and I'd start reading a few pages of one of those novels. And guess what? I'd get into them and I'd forget what I was worried about. Does it make sense? And it doesn't have to be spiritual. It could be. Whatever's true, lovely, and so on, think about these things. But it could be, I checked the Kansas City Chiefs websites. I might not after this weekend, because if they lose to the Raiders, it's baseball season. But I check I would check certain websites. I would, there were certain things I did. You find your own way of getting distracted. Now, when I first started doing this, it took me about 20 minutes to get into flow. Now it takes 2 minutes because I practice it. Okay, does it make sense? Then, after you get into the flow, the power now is gone, and you can actually go back to that troublesome thought and reevaluate how you did. Now, I'm out of time, but this is one practice that of the 4 that I learned that is designed to help you get rid of the flesh in your brain, which triggers automatically anxiety-producing ways of thinking and feeling and behaving without you even knowing it's doing it, and to be able to replace that over time with peace triggers and joy triggers. And you don't forget, you won't be good at this in the early stages, so don't get down on yourself and quit. If you stick with this, and some of the other practices are helpful too, you will change, and it will take 2 to 4 months, and you will see a noticeable difference. That's the truth. Now, I want to just summarize with this. First of all, I want you to have hope. I was really messed up, and I could still have anxiety and depression in the future. I'm not foolproof, but I'm so much better than I was, and I'm able to handle it. So be hopeful, because you can get better. I mean it, you can get better. Number 2, remember this, that a lot of your anxiety is a learned habit that is now just triggered automatically by your brain and your heart muscle. And you can get rid of those habits and replace them with peace and joy triggers if you engage in the right practices. And the 4-step solution is one of those practices.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.